Hello, I hope you're keeping well. It's me, Jason Paul, and I'm doing an episode today, just you and I'm going to talk about the subject of addiction because I've done a couple of videos now that have talked about addiction a little bit, my experiences of it, but I want to delve into it in more detail because I've had so many beautiful emails from so many of you, and I know it's a topic that is very shrouded, first of all, in a sense of shame. The reason I know it's shrouded in a sense of shame is because I myself have been ashamed of it for such a bloody long time. And I'll talk through my experiences of addiction, and we're going to go right back in time to the beginning, to the first ever time that I guess how far do we go when we go back to addiction? Really, let's go back to the first time that I ever think I did something addictive. So if I go back to my childhood, I grew up in West London, and I didn't have a great deal in terms of monetary stuff when I was young, but what I did have was a beautiful mum who had me when she was 18 years old, and she just brought me up surrounded by love. And there's times growing up where I even think that I took on more of the role of the parent than my mum did, but that's kind of I was always very protective of my mum. I think because she had me when she was 18, and I would see her doing things that were usual things that an 18 or a 19 or a 20-year-old would do, learning life's lessons, especially when having a child so young. I was very, very protective of my mum. And my dad, my biological dad, my mum lodged with him, and the story goes, and I totally believe the story. Why would I not? Because I've had my own experiences with my biological dad. I'll go on to talk about those. Why not? We've gone from talking about addiction now to talking about all things related to me growing up. But my mum came back with me from the hospital. I'd just been born, and she was lodging with my biological dad in northwest London. And when she got back with the newborn, me, all of her stuff was on the doorstep that had been moved out because she hadn't paid rent for a couple of months because she was obviously very heavily pregnant. That was my absolutely beautiful dad. And growing up, he didn't really have any involvement or any real interest. I've probably seen him about 4 times growing up. I remember, actually, one of the funny stories my mum told me about my dad, biological dad, was he actually went to the police when I was about 11 years old because someone kept emptying the rubbish bins out on the front of his grass, and he thought, well, the only person it could possibly be would be Jason. That's the only person I could think who would do this. The police came to my mum's, and actually it was her that was doing it. I think after she'd had one too many Alco Pops on a Friday night. But that's a whole other story. I don't even know why I'm going into that. But I do remember always questioning why he wasn't that interested. And even as a very young guy and a young boy, I've always had a real sense of, I've been very sensitive as a young boy, despite the fact that you wouldn't necessarily think I was sensitive, because I was quite, I think I was quite hard work at points. I think I stopped becoming hard work when I got to about 12 years old, and then my brother became more hard work than I did. But, growing up, I certainly wasn't backwards in coming forwards, but I've always felt since the age of being a young child that I've had this sense of kind of wisdom. I've always felt that I am a lot older than my years, and that got me into a lot of trouble, as you can imagine, in school, because I used to think that I was much more intelligent than the teachers at times. And it wasn't that I was ever academically clever, because I've always struggled in school unless it was creative subjects, because the way the education system works when it's academic subjects, my brain just doesn't work like that. A lot of people can learn A, B, C, D, E, F, G. My brain doesn't work like that. I learn A, B, C, X, Y, Z. If you give me, a Hoover, I am not the sort of person to read the instruction manual. I am the sort of person who goes in and starts using it, and I'll figure it all out later, which, as you can imagine, doesn't always work well. But that's just the way my brain works. I have been diagnosed with ADHD, but Do you know what? I've got so many mixed feelings about it because when you have an assessment, it's someone assesses you for an hour. They ask you a lot of questions. And whilst I do think I have it, I've chosen not to take medication because in a way, yes, ADHD has limited me in a lot of ways in terms of relationships. And I'll go on to talk about this because I do think it crosses over to substance abuse in some ways as well, ADHD. But I wouldn't ever want to start medication because I also think in a way it's my superpower. I don't think I'd be where I am in my career owning a national multi-million pound business if it wasn't for my ADHD, because you find a lot of neurodiverse people can have very vivid imaginations, and that's true for me in my business as well. I will literally some days just come up with idea after idea after idea. Don't get me wrong, I'm not the detail person who's very good at putting detail. What will happen, I'll tell you what will happen. I'll come up with loads of great ideas but then not necessarily have the detail to put them into practice. But what I've learned over the years with my ADHD is that I've kind of plugged gaps of where my weaknesses are. So I'll have people around me who are good detail people, and I know that my role is to provide inspiration and ideas. And that's how I've kind of played ADHD as my superpower. I've also, I'm very quick at working as well, but I also get very bored. If I'm not constantly stimulated with loads of work to do, I can find myself just procrastinating and getting tired. So I'm a very, very peculiar person, you could say. But anyway, back to the subject in hand. So I grew up in northwest London, and when I got to about 11 years old, we moved out of London. We moved to Kent. And at the time, the reason we did was because house prices in London were obscene. And me and my brother were sharing a really small room. And we decided to move to Kent. So my mum and my stepdad, my brother's dad, found a really nice new build house in a place called Rochester. And when we went to go and view the house, it was idyllic Rochester. You pulled in and there was this medieval castle that was a tourist attraction, and our house was just up the road from that. It was all idyllic and beautiful when we viewed the house. And even so much as in the Barrett brochure, there was the perfect school just down the road. Everything looked perfect. However, what we didn't realise was surrounding Rochester, and this was, bear in mind, this was before the days of the internet. The internet was a thing, but it was dial-up, it was AOL, it was not the internet that we have today. So, I can totally understand why we fell into this trap. But it turned out that Rochester, the town in Kent where we moved to, was surrounded by so many neighbouring towns that the word chav, and if you don't know what the word chav is, just Google it to all of the lovely American and Australian listeners. But the word chav actually derived from the town literally next door to where we grew up in Rochester. So what we did was we landed, and it turned out that the school down the road was a grammar school, and I wasn't eligible to go to a grammar school because I hadn't done the 11 plus, because the grammar school system wasn't a thing in London. So after a battle with the schooling system, I got admitted into a school in the Chav town next door. And I'll tell you what, my school days, once I went to that school, were absolutely bloody awful. It was an all-boys school. I will never forget the first day of starting there. And, I was of that age where I was about 13 years old, still finding my feet, questioning my sexuality, because I knew something, I knew that I was, starting to feel feelings towards boys, which in itself was very unsettling because back then, there wasn't, the kind of presence of LGBT stuff that there is today. So that was confusing for me. And I'll never forget my first day of walking into that school. And not that the school did not admit me in any nice way either, because they took me in to the front of the classroom and said, "This is Jason, find your own seat." And, straight away, I felt like I was thrown into the lion's pack, looking around, knowing that these, a lot of these kids weren't particularly, friendly. And I knew that it was going to be a really tough time at school. So after a few weeks of being at the school, it really did feel like a lot of the time it was a battle just to kind of feel safe, because people were getting beaten up all the time. And in some ways, I think it pushed myself and my brother closer together. But it was just not a nice school. It was a horrible place to be. So I did manage to find a group of friends, and it was probably around the time when I was about 15 years old was the first ever time that I tried a joint with my friend. And I just remember it giving me fits and fits and fits of giggles, and everything was just super funny. And it was kind of a cultural thing, because back in that time when I grew up, it was American Pie and all of those things. So then I'm going to fast forward through a lot of my story now, because I could go into all of my days of when I left school. Because when I first left school, my first ever job, and I didn't get great GCSEs. I got barely any GCSEs, but that's because we didn't even get really taught at the school. Teachers would stand at the front, give us a textbook, and then we'd just be made to copy the textbook into a workbook. And that was a maths lesson, basically. So unsurprisingly, being an ADHD mind, I was never ever going to achieve anything in the setup I was in, or the school. So I wanted to leave school basically as soon as I could. And at the time, I was really into performing magic, like performing card tricks, performing illusions. And I was part of a society called the Medway Magical Society. And I made really good friends with a guy called Jamie, who was about the same age as me. And we would practice magic all the time. And when I left school, my first kind of job was I just started busking in the streets, doing magic and performing. And before you knew it, I was quite confident then. The funny thing was, I wouldn't be backwards in coming forwards. I remember one time I rang up the local newspaper, and then they came out, they did a section on me performing, and that led to me then getting restaurant magic. So I would perform in different restaurants, and then I would do hotel work and then weddings, all at the tender age of 16. That then led to me working for Virgin Atlantic, and I was cabin crew for a few years, flew all around the world at 18 years old, which was just like an absolute dream. And then I decided to leave that to join the Met Police after a few years, because I thought I must get a proper job, because the time zones were just playing absolute havoc with my diabetes. So I went through, like I've said in some episodes before, I went through a really dark time in my life. Literally, I would say it was like the dark night of the soul, hell and back, pretty much from the moment I joined the police, because I was in a domestic abuse relationship, which was just awful. I was absolutely highly petrified of my partner at the time. And he just instilled the fear of God in me. I never knew what he was going to do next. I was constantly being threatened with him making false allegations to the police, aka my employer. All the while longer at work, I was going through hell and back as the result of the treatment I got from a sergeant that I worked for. And my life was just dark. It was a really horrible time. So like I said in previous episodes, when I went to go break up with this partner that I was with, he then ended up making a series of false allegations against me, which then put me through 18 months of hell, having to go through a trial where I was unanimously found not guilty, then went back to the police. But eventually I just had to get out the police, because it was absolutely degrading my soul, my essence, my mental health. And then I decided to take 2/3 of a pay cut to take a trainee job working in recruitment. And to be honest with you, I have realised now on reflection that I have never even really stopped to address the trauma that happened to me in that period of my life. I've never had any counselling, any therapy for that. What I pretty much did was I left the police. I was earning an okay salary in the police. I was then earning 2/3 less, whilst trying to still afford my mortgage for my flat in London, which my mum was living in. So, I felt the pressure that was my mum's home. I needed to make sure that my mum means everything to me. I needed to make sure that, she was secure because she wasn't earning a lot of money in her job in London. And then I needed to pay my own rent. And every month in this trainee recruitment job, I was bringing in about £1,000 less than I was paying out. So I was getting in more and more and more and more and more and more debt. And it was in my early days in recruitment. I would wake up at 6 a.m, make sure that I'm in at 7:30 because I'm the trainee. I've got to make sure that I'm the first one in the morning because that was what was expected, but not just because it was expected, because that's pretty much my work ethic anyway. And then I would work till 6 o'clock at night. Then I would do spray tans all evening to make extra money, and do that till about 10 o'clock at night, and then rinse and repeat and do that 5 days over. Then I'd probably do more spray tans at the weekend. And I was pushing myself. I was running and running and running. And, to be quite frank with you, failure was not an option. Success was the only option I had. So at every free moment I had, I would... had headphones in. I'd be listening to tapes on how to sell yourself, how to be an effective communicator, how to understand psychology. I'd be listening to tapes about law tapes on the law so I could understand, how to sell lawyers, because I was doing recruitment for lawyers. And I literally, it was like fake it till you make it. Every single day I would just push myself to learn everything, because the job I went into, yes, they did give very, very limited training, but it really was kind of one of those industries where you either tread water and you swim or you sink. And I just knew that there was no other option for me. So I think the fear of failure was enough to make me successful. And over a period of about 6 months, I ended up going from obviously just entering the industry to then becoming the biggest biller in the agency. But it wasn't a healthy life because, I'd never stopped to address that trauma. Yes, I was starting to earn good money and take home thousands of pounds of commission, but I was hurting on the inside. I was bloody hurting. And, there was so much trauma that was unaddressed. I'd gone to a whole new city. I hadn't just, because I wanted to escape London, in all honesty, and I went to Manchester. So I didn't have any friends when I first got up there, and my friends were made through my job. So, one thing, I went out with one of my friends on a Saturday night once, probably a few months into recruitment, and they offered me a line of cocaine, and I did it, and it made me feel good. It made me feel good, and it made me forget about my problems in that moment. And it then became something that I would do every now and then on weekends, and it would make me feel good. It would make me forget about my problems. It would make me almost go like the pressure had been released from the week because it was just so manic. But then, like a lot of people who've had addictions do, you then fall into this dangerous trap of using these substances to then make you feel better. And what happens is, and I say this from lived experience, I look at dopamine as like a seesaw. And when you do, something like cocaine, for instance, what happens is it floods your brain with dopamine. You feel great. But then when you come down from that high afterwards, you will come down a bit less than where you were at the start. So under what is equilibrium. And then over time, what happens is you'll do another bit of cocaine, feel good again, but then you'll come even that bit further down below where you are before. So what starts to happen with people is they lose that equilibrium, and it also then starts to affect your brain because you don't make as much dopamine naturally. So over a period of time, and I would say I did it a bit. I did it for a couple of years on and off. And then I canned it in, and I got into a relationship in Manchester with a guy. And I didn't see it at the time. I think I was craving love. I think a lot of us beautiful empaths, we are craving love. We are craving that feeling of love. And I found a guy, and he was a guy called Andrew. And I met him on a speed dating night. Now, I didn't want to go on a speed date at night, I'll tell you what, because I was nervous. Although I outwardly portray that I am a confident person, I'm a bit of a chameleon, and it's almost like I've got a mask on. Sometimes when I go out, I'm a great performer and I'll fit in, and but actually, what is the true essence of me? The true essence of me is I'm actually quite shy. So my mum had booked this speed dating night for me. And I remember getting to the bar about 20 minutes early, and I just said, Mum, I rang her up and said, look, I can't do this. I'm really nervous. I can't see anyone here. I don't even think it's on. Looking for every excuse under the sun not to go to this speed date at night. And she said, get a beer now and stay on the phone to me. You're going to this. So I stayed. I went. There was about 10 guys there. And there was one guy that, I really liked talking to. His name was Andrew. And then you kind of filled out these forms where at the end of the night, you then get a message in your inbox if you either put down that you like them or you don't like them or whatever it was back then. And then you get a message. So I put down, obviously, that I liked Andrew, obviously. And then I didn't hear anything back for a couple of days. And I just kind of assumed, I'm just going to have a sip of my water 1 second. I just assumed that Andrew wasn't interested, but then he did pop up a few days later. And our relationship did move pretty quick, to be fair. I think after about 4 months, we moved in together, which, I would not do now, being older and wiser. Definitely not. But looking back now, he was very materialistic, and it was a time in my life where I was just starting to, and I'd never had this before. I'd never been in a position where I had lots of spare money, but I was in a position where I was starting to do really well in recruitment and taking home a decent amount of bonus every month. So one thing led to another. We bought a house together, and one thing, and I don't necessarily like the analogy of red flags, but I think it rings very true. I never really liked the majority of Andrew's friends, actually. And I really liked him, though, but I wasn't keen on his friends. And as time went on, they were a very central focus in his life, obviously, as a lot of friends are. But I found them to be quite materialistic. They'd all done a fashion degree together in Manchester University. And I just found them not to be very welcoming, also in situations where I'd go out with his friends, but then they'd spend the whole time together talking about the past. And I'd sort of feel, well, I don't really know what to say because I don't know anything about any of these stories. And it kind of made me feel a bit excluded from the conversation as sorts, to be totally honest. But anyway, Andrew convinced me over time, not convinced me because I started doing well in recruitment. But there was always some bugbears I had whereby I would work for bosses. I would work my arse off. I'd work 7 days a week. I'd go above and beyond. I'd bill 3 times more than anyone else was billing. But the investment in maybe the equipment I was using or, the investment in terms of the team, the people and whatever, never sat quite right with me. So I decided to take a really bold leap of faith and start my own business. But I'm not going to lie, I was absolutely shitting it when it came to how to run a business, the tax side of it. How do you even get started? Where do you know where to go? How do you do anything to do with running a business? But Andrew, being kind of very materialistic, he'd ran a business, done a business degree, and convinced me that even though his business was a failure on reflection, he convinced me that he would be able to help me with all of this. So that was enough for me. It got to the day where I built it up in my mind that I was going to serve my notice to my current boss, which was very nerve-wracking as well because I really liked my boss. I didn't really want to have to do the horrible thing of serving notice, but I knew I had to do it in order to grow and in order to move forward. So I built it up in my mind. I served notice, and straight after I served notice, I was due to go and meet Andrew in the city centre in Manchester for lunch. So I thought it was like a lunch, to kind of celebrate the fact I'd left my job, got this bright future ahead. So I went and met Andrew, and straight away I knew something was wrong. As soon as I got there, something was not all right. I could tell by the look on his face. And he just very calmly said to me, Jason, I'm breaking up with you. I've moved all of the stuff out of our shared house this morning, and this is it. And you can imagine that. I've just served my notice on my job. I don't have any clue about what I'm doing with the business. He was kind of my crutch in that regard. My whole life instantly was tipped upside down, and I was completely heartbroken. So me being me, I literally felt like my world was kind of imploding around me. I booked a ticket to Thailand, then spent about 5 nights, got to Bangkok. I didn't stop crying on the flight on the way over, by the way. I was like an emotional mess. The poor Thai man sitting next to me, I don't think he knew what to do, whether to console me, whether to comfort me. But yeah, I got on the plane because I'll tell you the story, because it is a bit of a funny story on reflection. I feel sorry for the Jason of that time, but I had booked a ticket and I decided that I was going to do the whole Lonely Planet thing where I just turn up and find accommodation when I get there. So then I got on a plane from Heathrow, sat down on the plane, and it suddenly dawned on me, I'm on my way to Thailand. I've got no accommodation. I don't know where I'm going when I get there. And then it just all kind of overwhelmed me and I started crying. And then by the time we got there, I just about accepted, Jason, you've got it together now. You're in Thailand, just relax. As soon as I got there, then I started wailing in tears again. Then I managed to get it together. Only after that time, by the time I got out the baggage hall, I just about got it together. So I then decided to spend 5 days working my way from Bangkok down on an overnight sleeper train to a remote island in Thailand. So I spent 5 days getting all the way to this remote part of Thailand. Then literally thought, what the bloody hell am I doing here? I've got no support, no friends around me. I've just had a breakup. I'm in a completely different time zone where I can't even speak to my mum because every time I ring her, she's either at work or asleep. I thought, Jason, I need to get back. I've got shit to do. I need to actually plan this business. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to run a business. I don't know anything. I need to get back to England. So then I spent the next 3 days trekking all the way back up to Bangkok again to get a flight home. So that was my experience of Thailand. But anyway, the reason I go on with this story is because I started my own business all by myself and it was bloody hard. It was really, really, really hard. And again, during that time, I'd never stopped to address any of this trauma. None of it. Because I've always kind of seen myself as a bit of the protector as well with my mum. You know, I kind of want to shield her from, things. I don't want to add stress to her. So because I grew up with her young, I've never really wanted to. I've always seen my role as being the rock of the family and being the person people go to. So, my default position is to not want to worry people necessarily. So to cut a long story short, because I could go on with this story for absolutely ages, I then ended up coming across a friend, Helen, when I moved to Bristol. And then end up doing cocaine again on the weekends. And this time, unfortunately, it became a habit. And I ended up doing it. It got to the point where I was doing it every single day. And it's because I was in so much pain. And I guess one of the morals of this story is, how did I actually get myself to a place where I stopped using it? Because I was not in a good place. Yes, I was having people come up to me all the time and say, Jason, you're so successful. Your business is doing so well. But on the inside, I did not feel successful at all. Like, not successful at all. I just felt so unhappy. So eventually, I never actually sought support through kind of a group, through Narcotics Anonymous, nothing like that, because I had so much shame. I was so ashamed to even go and sit in a room and say to people that I was an addict. So I ended up through literally the cold turkey approach, which I must say I would not advise anyone to do. I think one of the most important things to do if you were struggling with an addiction, and this does not have to be, drugs. It could be food. It could be alcohol. It could be sex. It could be anything, because as human beings, I'm going to say this because I've done a lot of research into this and I feel myself being an ex-addict. I feel very qualified to talk about this. I feel that, we are human beings. We are programmed to be addicted to things. It is just the way that we are wired. And, I know a lot of us might only assume addiction is, it can be anything. I'm sure, speaking to you, the Soul Sync audience, I don't need to teach you how to suck eggs. I'm sure we know that people can get addicted to everything. But the point I'm trying to make here is that If you do have an addiction or you are struggling, do seek help. Do not do what I do, because up until only recently, I never even told anyone about my addictions, honestly. I literally kept them as one of my dirty secrets. But I realised that actually that's so bad for my soul. It's so bad for my energy, because that was trapped within inside me, because it was a secret that I carried. I now know, if you don't let energy out and you hold on to energy or emotions, whether it be good or bad, they sit within you. And if you hold on to these negative emotions and don't deal with them, they can actually manifest themselves into physical diseases. And I realized that I needed to heal. And one of the big things that's happened to me recently is I've had so many problems with my throat. I've had the sorest throat for such a long time. And I actually think I've had an energy blockage in my throat, because I haven't been speaking enough of my truth, because addiction is still something I feel so ashamed of. Well, I don't feel that ashamed about it now. I actually send love and healing to the Jason of that age. I don't feel shame for it anymore, but I did feel shame for it for a bloody long time. So I feel like I've just waffled pretty much for the last half an hour, but I just thought I would put this out there, because people have messaged me about addiction, and I know that a lot of people struggle with it, and I must say that I know that I'm never necessarily out of the woods with it. I know that it's always something that I've got to be aware of. I've got to live my life in a way of always keeping tabs on myself, making sure that I'm living my life in a healthy way, and most importantly more than anything, I am being kind to myself. Am I being kind to myself? Am I giving myself self-love? And not lying to myself, not being destructive to myself. So many of us, and I have been terrible for it over the years, lying to myself about, going, oh, Jason, I'm not doing that thing or this thing or this thing. But actually, recently I've started being a lot more honest with myself. I really think journaling helps with that. It helps you to be very reflective. And I must admit, I'm trying to get into a really regular practice these days of journaling. But what I would say on a closing note, if you are struggling or know someone who is struggling in any regard with moderation, addiction, anything like that, honestly, go and speak to people, even if it's a professional or people that you love, and just surround yourself with people with good intentions. So I hope this episode has helped just a little bit. Being very reflective for me to even think back to some of these memories. But as always, lots of love to you, and until next time, goodbye.